think as I've gotten a little older too, I'm fascinated in the more positive ways that technology can help us or affect us, and the physical element of the experience is the most important, and that it isn't an experience where you're just staring at your phone. So
this idea of a relationship with a technological device that took us away from a human relationship.
It's not here yet the way that other elements of our digital worlds are. But when it comes, the challenges and the problems of our education system are going to become more acute, because the things we're teaching our kids at school are going to become less important, or at least the depth of them will become less important. And who gets to decide what is truth? So I think we have, as a species, an enormous existential challenge of, first of all, defining the truth, and second of all, defining what it means to be human.
Why don't you start off today by just letting us know who Oscar Nicholson is. Obviously, you come to us from a very strong tech background, but it might be good for those who are listening to get a really good idea as to where you started, what really got you into the digital landscape, and how that came about, essentially. So why don't you start with that?
Yeah. So basically, I don't have a digital education per se. I was a biochemist, and then pivoted out into basically like sales and marketing while I was studying my master's, and strangely enough just fell in with people. I was always playing with cameras and technology and that sort of thing, so I was falling in with some of the people who were the first members of MySpace, or the first staff of MySpace in Australia. So I'm really aging myself here.
Wow.
But basically, MySpace then very quickly got acquired by Rupert Murdoch, had a massive cash injection, went hard on a content strategy. So back in those days, because content wasn't really a buzzword, but they had a mandate to become like a publisher, like their parent company, News Limited.
Yeah.
And so I got pulled in because I had, camera gear and all that sort of stuff to do all of their music and fashion. So it was a pretty good gig. And within less than a year, I just packed everything else in. Kept doing my masters, but because that was my kind of fallback. But very quickly just started making a very good living doing awesome things like covering Fashion Week and filming musos that were coming out on tour and doing music festivals and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, it was about the best job you could possibly imagine for a 20-year-old. And what I realized was that the kind of the technology winds were very much blowing towards kind of social media and kind of networked content in a way that was completely unlike anything we'd ever really seen before. Like just the barrier to entry was just lowering. So MySpace heated out, as everyone knows, and it became much more about Facebook and to a lesser extent Twitter. And so really pivoted into that. But again, the barrier to entry was kind of lowering so much that the kind of the margins weren't great. So I started playing more in the area of, I'd already been building out MySpace pages for brands and users and that sort of thing. And so web development sort of came somewhat naturally thereafter. And so started to, kind of move more into the kind of the product and technology space, and then had the opportunity with all of the kind of the audiovisual technology that I've been developing and everything that I got to work on the first public augmented reality project, which was for Unilever for Lynx or Axe deodorant, and that was just a game changer for me. So I wouldn't have dared call myself a creative technologist before then, but after that it was just on for young and old, and so I was building product, working with big brands to develop, kind of brand experiences, digital brand experiences, particularly brand experiences that, kind of bridge the digital and physical world, and, consulting pretty extensively with the likes of McDonald's and Schweppes and that sort of thing on how to, how to better engage audiences in spaces, particularly retail spaces, but public spaces as well. And I had a company called On in Sydney back then, and then came on board with Razorfish, which some people might remember. And then I started a company called Romeo, which also specialized in the kind of creative technology field, still, kind of in the traditional digital side of things, so building websites and that sort of thing. But, really going hard after the, kind of the experiential side of things, which, was kind of the big, interesting projects where not many people could specialize in it.
So what is it that drives you about the bleeding edge technology and how that interacts with people? Is there something particular about grabs you and excites you, or is it just another tool for you?
I think I've always just been the kid that was pulling stuff apart and putting it back together to see how it works. So I've kind of got that innately within me. I'm always just, fascinated with the possibilities of technology. I think as I've gotten a little older too, I'm fascinated in the more positive ways that technology can help us or affect us, and some of the negative ways, I suppose, that technology is impacting us. So, where I've built a lot of my experiential projects, it's been very important that the IRL, the physical element of the experience, is the most important, and that it isn't an experience where you're just staring at your phone. So everybody's seen the memes of like, here's what dance parties were like in the early 2000s, and here's what they're like now, and everybody's got phones, and 20 years ago everybody was having a good time, and so I'm acutely aware of what our phones are doing to us, and that's something that I feel like having a good grasp of technology, but also the behavioral elements of technology as well. So kind of the UX, just to put a big broad label on it, becomes very, very important. So yeah, I suppose it's humanizing technology in a way that really fascinates me.
Okay. So, I mean, I often talk with clients and with other people around the history of human interaction where, for thousands of years we were living in small communities that we would associate, we'd work in the fields together, come down at the end of the day, be with family groups or with community groups, and the human interaction was much higher at a different level. It wasn't probably until 1972 when Pong was released that we first had this idea of a relationship with a technological device that took us away from a human relationship, and rightly so, as you pointed out. Ever since MySpace, probably 2002, we've had a new social media platform released almost every year, and it's not stopping anytime soon. There's added complications of things like CRISPR, engineering, AI obviously being introduced in a big way now. And as we kind of, I wouldn't say stepping into the AI future, probably running into the AI future at the moment, what do you see as perhaps some of the, not so dangers, but perhaps consequences that we might have learned from our time with social media that we can apply thinking in terms of how we're racing into AI at the moment? What are some red flags that you might be seeing in terms of that human relationship?
So I would argue that our relationship with technology, our deeper relationship with technology, goes back further, and people were lamenting the dissolution of family unity. As kids and parents, gathered around the television, and in a similar way, we've got that with, increasing fragmentation of the family unit with everybody off on their own device. I would say that some of the risks and I don't think I'm saying anything, greatly revelatory or anything, but the great risks are some of the risks that occurred at that early epoch of broadcast, particularly radio, and the rise of fascism in Europe, which is the ability to disseminate misinformation, to promulgate, hate and discontent, and that is potentially going to be really amplified by AI. They're trying to put some guardrails on AI around, the development, restricting the ability to create hateful content or, warnings about misinformation. It's a very difficult area, and kind of gets down to the challenges of, which is, in many ways, a philosophical challenge of what is truth, and who gets to decide what is truth. So I think we have, as a species, an enormous existential challenge of, first of all, defining the truth, and second of all, defining what it means to be human, because anybody who's spent much time with AI, I mean, it's not human. Like it's very clear, but very quickly, you're starting to see that I suppose the things that it can do are things that you normally would have either done yourself or gotten someone to help you with. It's interesting that I exited my company around the time that ChatGPT 3 came out, and one of the things I really lamented about exiting my company was that, I was going to take some time off. I ended up consulting, but I was sort of lamenting the fact that I didn't have staff to work with anymore, and very quickly ChatGPT just filled that gap. Now, I don't know whether that's a very healthy response, because there's a lot to be gained from human interaction that goes well beyond just, passing information or kind of developing insights or kind of summarizing documents and things like that. But it is amazing how quickly I didn't miss or didn't worry so much about that, kind of losing that, that kind of help. Basically ChatGPT can now do what my juniors used to do, and I don't mean to denigrate them in any way, but
it's just where we're at, right?
Yeah. I can literally just what used to take half a day and had to be scheduled in, I can literally hit a prompt and close that tab, go back to what I'm doing, and come back, and it's come up with something that in many cases is fine. Sometimes it's actually like surprisingly good. Sometimes needs some work, but fundamentally, a disturbingly similar process to what would happen with, with my staff, where I'd be like, okay, well, we need to do a bit more work here. We'll, do the same thing with ChatGPT or Claude. So I would suggest that the challenges here are kind of twofold. It's external and internal, and the external is, how do we define what truth is? And, because it's consensus used to be the benchmark for truth, and now consensus is something that's largely been upended by, mass media and the internet. And then second of all, the biggest, probably the single biggest, is going to be existential, which is to say, like, what are we, what is the purpose of humanity? Like, as we increasingly find, generative LLMs, and then eventually, a GAI is going to be doing is very similar to what we did or do. What's the point of us? What are we here for? I think some people are really going to struggle with that because, many people have probably defined themselves by being, successful in some sort of knowledge working, some sort of knowledge employment. So your lawyers, your doctors, that sort of thing. And as they become increasingly redundant, which is going to happen, the kind of the way that society held them in high esteem is going to also diminish. And people like that might find themselves, kind of wondering what it is that they should be doing themselves.
Yeah, and I think that points to something a little bit more deeper in terms of us as humans. Is there a danger in relying too much on what we do as a person to identify who we are? And if we take away our job, if we take away what our output is, what does that do to the psyche of the individual in terms of I can now no longer identify with who I am, and I've lost who I am.
Yes.
We certainly saw the damage that social media has done to our whole generation, where they've lost what it means to have a face-to-face conversation. They don't know what it means to manage reality, because all they're faced with is a false sense of reality in their screen.
Anxiety has gone up. That's the symptom. That
Absolutely.
shows
And
what's
we
happening.
certainly see that with the removal of human interaction. How do we take that learning into this new future? I mean, you talked about identifying truth and probably at some level trying to go, well, what is our benchmark? Do you believe that truth exists outside of ourselves, or is it just what we say it is? What's the blur between our perception, and is there subjective truth outside of ourselves?
Well, yeah. If you talk to a mathematician, they tell you that truth is external and is immutable, and 1 + 1 always equals 2. But then, yeah, there's so much now opinion forming around the kind of the grey areas of human understanding. It's now the Trump administration is talking about Ukraine being the aggressor in their war, which is just so categorically false. Yeah, I suppose that also, is more about like propaganda and purposeful misinformation. But what's that doing to conversations around the barbecue in certain parts of America? Are they now taking that as truth? So I'd say that's a very complicated one. But I think to the point of what our purpose is and how we kind of decouple our identities from our occupations. I feel like education is where that needs to start, and we are unfortunately in the West still saddled with a industrial era education system that still works more or less the same way it has for the last 200 to 300 years, which is you have core subjects, core skills, taught from 9 to 3, largely timed so that parents who are working have time off from their kids, and what is taught is largely about work, interacting in a world that has become so complicated and whose occupations have become so specialized that you need to become some form of productive member of society to function. And something in that needs to change, because right now, before AI really becomes mainstream, and I would argue that we're in somewhat of an echo chamber. Like, bear in mind that AI really only has a user base of in the region of somewhere to 100 to 200 million people. That's not a lot of people. That's not like social media. So I would argue that AI is coming, but it's not here yet the way that other elements of our digital worlds are. But when it comes, the challenges and the problems of our education system are going to become more acute, because the things we're teaching our kids at school are going to become less important, or at least the depth of them will become less important. And I strongly believe that what needs to be included in the curriculum is more philosophy, more questioning. What is it to be a person? Ethics, morals, the frameworks around which we need to live our lives in a world that is kind of largely handled for us by automation. And it's interesting. The parallel actually goes far further back than the 20th century. The parallel I would use is ancient Greece, which is kind of the birthplace of, and the foundation of all philosophy. A time that, kind of generated all of this amazing thought. But what most people probably don't talk about is that all of that was underpinned and enabled by slavery. And I'm not condoning slavery in any way. And I like just slavery bad. I'm not even going to go there. But basically, the parallel is that slavery and AI should enable time, and having time gives you the ability to, basically investigate these notions of humanity, to kind of deepen your philosophical understanding of the world, and that's what I'm hoping AI does, instead of just becoming another productivity tool like email became, and everything else that we use, Slack and all that really just, increases the complications of our working world and puts greater demands of productivity on us.
You've been in the digital space for a long time, and people would probably define innovation differently in the space that you've been there. How would you define innovation?
Yeah, it's a bit of an overused buzzword, and I caution people against using it. I actually had it in my title for a while, and it probably didn't help me, calling myself, innovation director, or, whatever the title was.
Yeah.
Just because, I mean, there's a couple of elements to innovation. I mean, first, to define innovation, there's invention, and invention requires a creative step. It requires some sort of great leap of logic and creativity that arrives at something that is more or less whole cloth new. So we're talking about, just to use a really kind of facile, simple example, the wheel. Innovation is iterating upon things that are already there. So basically improving them, making them work better, making people's interactions with them better. So, taking the wheel and creating the hub and spoke wheel. That would be an innovation. And so for me, in working in the innovation space, largely what it was about was really just about finding a problem and properly defining it, and then applying, a kind of a mix of creativity and technical nous to develop a solution for it. And really framing the problem was the part that tripped most people up, because I don't think anybody to this day that I've worked with fully appreciated how important that was. I always used a quote from Albert Einstein, which was, if I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes defining the problem and 5 minutes solving it. It is absolutely pointless even trying to tackle innovation if you don't properly understand the problem. And so there's a lot of upfront discovery and problem definition work that needs to be done before you even get into the ideation phase, requirement scoping, kind of needs mapping, all that sort of stuff. And many clients found that a little bit difficult, so it really required a pretty persuasive argument that the work was worth doing. The other challenge was, and this is very much a local challenge, is that Australia is, I think Australia is one of the least innovative countries in the world based on the Harvard Business School's economic diversification metrics. So basically we fall behind like Senegal and Bhutan.
That's bizarre. You would never guess that. Yeah.
Well, if you work in it, you see it, because the conservative attitude of most people within this, of most certainly senior people in this country, is pretty staggering. And having had some dealings with the US and the UK, it is amazing how low the risk appetite is. And I think culturally we've been both blessed and cursed with an abundance of resources, and we've got kind of a lot of land. So real estate and mining are kind of two of the cornerstones of our economy. And I think that because we've been able to identify as a nation and within the business community that like money can be made relatively risk-free through real estate, and the surrounding industries, building, that sort of thing, and then through mining, through pulling resources out of the ground. That has created a culture that would basically dissuade anybody from taking any big puns. So I've worked with a lot of financial institutions, and we are heavily regulated here. So that's another component to it, that we have a government that is, in many ways it's good, but like in other ways, kind of having this overregulation, kind of the so-called nanny state, does mean to say that it is harder to get things over the line. So many of the things I've done within the financial space, the compliance responsibilities have been pretty onerous and have been massive impediments to any kind of innovation.
I think you touched on something interesting with the concept of risk. That risk forces us to perhaps become more resourceful, forces us to think more deeply, more critically about things.
Yes.
As we step into the use of technology, and as we're becoming more comfortable with that, how much does that remove our ability to think critically?
Well, I think that putting risk management front and center, I'm not against risk management. Like, it is an important part of innovation, but it needs to kind of come somewhere in the middle, if not towards the end, rather than be the thing that kind of drives it. So having risk management, I mean, it's a little like asking someone out on a date. Like, if all you think about is, oh, they might say no, there's probably 100 reasons why someone might say no to getting a coffee or something like that. But if that's what you think about, you're probably not going to go through with it. So it's like a mindset shift. And I feel like our business, and certainly at the C-level, our business community has placed an overemphasis on risk management. And, in many ways, like, risk management should also be about, opportunity cost. So what is the cost of not doing this? Can you afford to be, second to market, third to market in this? And so they actually took that advice. That was something that required risk assessment to actually, kind of the opportunity costs had to actually be, calculated, which is a very vague process. Like, you can't accurately predict what costs are, but you can certainly put some compelling numbers around things to kind of, I suppose, do a kind of a risk against opportunity cost calculation.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that I guess Australia has been risk averse for a long time now, industrially, and in many other areas, it's been very difficult for many years to get funding from government to try new ideas. We largely have outsourced that. If you have a good idea, then go overseas and come back to us once it's developed. Mm-hmm. The long-standing tradition of that being in place in an Australian culture, has that developed a more risk-averse entrepreneurial mindset in Australia, or has that just been part of the Australian psyche? It's kind of a chicken and egg question there.
I would say it's very much, it has had an impact upon the community. I mean, I would argue the government in Australia has probably, look, I wouldn't actually know for sure, but I would say that it's probably commensurate with, the US in just shift, like funding, like dollar for dollar against our GDP and population. Mm-hmm. Probably isn't that much different. Might be wrong. I'm not 100% sure on that. What I would say, though, is that the investment landscape in Australia is not very friendly towards what you might term venture capital, which is, I've got, I don't know, $500,000 worth of, free capital that I want to put somewhere. I can put it in a term deposit and make, 3.5% a year. I can put it in an EFT. I can maybe make, 7 to 8% a year. I could, kind of do something like a superannuation, same sort of thing. Or I could put it into some sort of a venture or a pooled venture, like your typical kind of VC model. and it might do nothing. I might lose it all. Or I might be part of the investment group that backs the next Facebook, and my 500,000 turns into 500 million. And nobody wants to take that risk, because we also have property, and property has always been just amazing. I mean, if you invested in the Brisbane property market over the last 4 years, your compounding average is something like 11 or 12%. It's pretty hard to say no to that. So I would say that the investment landscape has made it difficult here. Whereas in places like the US, they think more in terms of, I suppose, like generational wealth and the wealth of, I suppose, creating something. A
legacy, yeah.
Yeah, and I suppose an entrepreneurial spirit. Whereas here in Australia, I would argue that we've had entrepreneurialism somewhat drummed out of us just because of the challenging policy and taxation environment. Like, it really is. You've got to be a little mad to start a business here, because you can basically make the same money risk free just working for someone else.
Yeah.
I would say that many of those factors can be pointed back to the de-diversification of our economy, and how the lessons that we have collectively learned as a country, within our government and everything, is that we are successful when we focus on a couple of key areas or key strengths. And that's going to bite us in the butt at some point in the future, because those things can't last forever.
I think there's a reason why we have the phrase bricks and mortar. It symbolizes security and that low risk investment over a longer period of time. What's been interesting is how shorter that investment return has been as time seems to increase. Whereas you would invest in a home or a series of homes expecting to have a return towards the end of retirement years. Now we're seeing those returns happen over a very short period of time. And it's still somewhat risk-free when you compare it to trying to develop a new technology, trying to develop a new idea, trying to change something in the marketplace,
which is hard as well.
Right,
it takes a lot of work.
Yeah,
you can put 2-3 years into building a product and come out at the end of it with absolutely nothing, and have worked 60-80 hour weeks for those 3 years, and have nothing to show for it.
Is there something to be said for the entrepreneurial spirit, and do we lose something when we don't have it as part of our society?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think that all human advancement has been due to something akin to the entrepreneurial spirit. I think that there were probably Cro-Magnon men and women who largely just wanted to keep doing what they were doing, and then there was probably the one outlier is like, let's try this, and in a lot of cases, when the calculus is we have X numbers of hours in the day to collect enough food to survive us through the winter, if you spend 8 hours trying to figure out how to make fire, we might come out at the end with less food and more in likelihood of starvation. Yeah, I can see why there's a tension between the two, but the importance has been that we have increased our quality of living. And it's increased exponentially over the last 70 years. Like, basically post World War II, I can't remember what the metrics are, but basically every single metric of quality of living has improved, from health and childhood mortality and life expectancy, and everything has basically improved. And largely that's due to taking a punt, having a risk appetite. I think that there've been lots of big gambles that have been made in the last 70 years. I mean, the Marshall Plan was the biggest one, which was post World War II, the rebuild of Europe, and we're kind of seeing it start to unravel now, because I think people's memories and understanding of history is so short that they don't realize what benefits came to the West generally, and largely to America, who were the kind of the primogenitors of the Marshall Plan. But all of that investment no one was 100% sure that that was going to pay off. And yet it paid off America can probably owe its standing as the number one economy for the last 70 years to the Marshall Plan.
I have a question around how do we encourage entrepreneurial spirit. Let me frame it with this experience. So a little over a year ago, I lost my job. Like many Australians, you spend most of your career in a particular area. You focus your skills in that particular area. I had my father pass away. I had a number of financial issues at the time, just due to the economy where we were at. And then I lost my job. And it felt as though in that process that all the safety nets were being ripped out from underneath me. And you come against this whole human crisis in that moment where you start to question your personal worth, your identity, your influence on your family, your influence on the world around you. However, sometimes those moments can be the catalyst, right, of driving you to do the thing that you've been talking about for years, however difficult it is and however much of an uphill battle that is, both emotionally, mentally and financially. How much can we encourage entrepreneurial spirit, and how much of it needs to be forced? Does it happen on its own, or do we need crises in order for things to really take root and to force us into change?
It's a really interesting question, and I'm so sorry to hear about your father. My father also passed away a year ago, and sounds like a pretty similar sort of time. I've also had a number of kind of challenging times. I very quickly, I'll just say that I believe all those things forge us in fire and make us stronger, make us wiser, help us deal too better with crises, and help us understand that we are not our jobs, and we are not, our identity is not our LinkedIn profile. Which that's something that I was, very much, and I think that, other people, I see it, and I know it because I talk to people about this, that, they really believe that their LinkedIn profile is, kind of who they are, or at least who the world perceives them to be. With regards to entrepreneurialism, my father who passed away, he was an entrepreneur. He and my mother had a business. And he was sort of forced into it. So he was a helicopter pilot and very quickly realized that there were literally no jobs that didn't involve him being away from his family for months at a time. And he didn't want to do that. So he had to take a punt and try to, basically create a life for himself as a, guy who, kind of just got through to the end of high school, had been in the Air Force, and then been a helicopter pilot, and that's it. So he didn't have a lot of, you might say, transferable skills in the 80s. And so, yeah, he was sort of forced into it, and he bought into a franchise, and that kind of did okay. He largely credits that as helping him understand business. So they kind of taught him, how to run P&Ls and all that sort of stuff. And then he started another business with my mother, and that had its ups and downs, but towards the end ended up being pretty successful. So I don't think he's the best example for the impetus to be an entrepreneurial, because I suppose for me, like, what drove me was having a measure of freedom and control over what I did or did not want to do. So that's a very privileged perspective, and I kind of, I suppose, went into it knowing that I'm very educated, so I have a fallback. I can do lots of things. And the last 2 years I've been doing a lot of consulting, and it's been pretty even with the economic conditions, it's actually been a pretty wonderful time.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of kind of interesting work. But I'm now at a crossroads where I have an opportunity, which I can't really discuss, but I'm going to take it because basically I get to shape this company in a way that is appeals to that entrepreneurial spirit. So, like, to me, it's a pretty complicated question because I suppose it depends on what the negatives and the positives are to entrepreneurialism to any one person. Like, someone who's close to me, like, has kind of thrown the idea around, but she is like absolutely never going to become an entrepreneur. Like, she's made it very clear, like when we've kind of talked about all the positives and negatives, it's like, nope, 9 to 5, salary that I can count on, all that sort of stuff. And she's quite senior, so she's kind of, I suppose, doing a lot of the work of an entrepreneur, but she's doing it for someone else as a kind of a salaried employee. So for some, it's going to be, yes, I want to be able to do what I want to do, or I have this fantastic idea. I mean, I think that ideas are probably where entrepreneurialism should really come from. Like, I think that for some people, entrepreneurialism is forced upon them, like it was kind of for my dad, where it's like, I think like the likes of Jim's Mowing or any franchise you can name, is probably largely motivated, or people buying into that is largely motivated by the fact that they're like, I want to have more control over my finances. I'm sick of working for someone. What they often find is that they work a whole lot harder, and instead of having one boss, they have every single client as a boss, and that's a much more challenging thing to manage. So whenever I talk to anybody about a business or a business idea, like my first thing is like, is this an idea worth backing? Because it probably should come from the idea. If it's come from necessity, then it's like, okay, well, that's just a straightforward calculation of, what do you stand to make? How much runway have you got? Like, in your current state, like, are your employment prospects really bad enough to need to become an entrepreneur, or to, buy into a franchise or start some sort of a business or a coffee cart or something like that? So yeah, there's two sides to the coin, the necessity, and then the, kind of the more, I suppose, privileged position of like, I am blessed enough to be able to, follow some sort of a dream.
So perhaps we've shifted away, because of our wealth over time, away from that idea that necessity is the mother of invention. Because of our privileged upbringing, we have the capability now of focusing more on ideas and using that as a catalyst to drive us to perhaps a better future, or rethinking how we do things in a better way. The deeper question is how far is too far sometimes with ideas, and how far is too far with AI? How far is too far with making the digital landscape much a part of who we are? And maybe the question is around the risk that you identified earlier. If the risk, if we find it easier to make a financial risk than we do to make an emotional risk, then is the formula right? I don't know the answer, but be keen to know your thoughts on that.
Yeah. I mean, were you starting this out as the question of like when to grit and when to quit, or was that more just about like how far do we take it, as in like how much success is too much success, like, and particularly in the kind of the advancement of technology?
It's more around how much do we allow technology to take over from what's most important to us, and what connects us and grounds us as to who we are as humans. You kind of highlighted the idea early on that it's really important to identify what our truth is as in terms of a human race.
Yes.
And I guess that's kind of the question, hinting at, well, how much of that integration in our life is too much?
Yeah.
And what would be the consequences around that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that my first experience with that was with Facebook. And so obviously when my business started pivoting more towards Facebook, I had to be on there. I had, people who were helping me, but like, obviously I had to know what was going on Facebook and how it worked, and, the constantly evolving, kind of interface and feature set that they had, and to say that I had to understand everything so that I could, do the best job for my clients that I could. And within, what would would it have been, like would have been about 2014, 2013. I just fully got off Facebook and just absolutely ended my relationship with Facebook. I still have a profile, but it's pretty much dormant. So I recognized that pretty early on, and it was one of probably the smarter decisions for me, because it just wasn't good for my mental health. It wasn't good for my time management as well. The problem with social media, if you work in social media, and anybody, it's very easy to fall down rabbit holes where you can technically say you're working, but you're not really. Like you're just kind of going down rabbit holes. You're doom scrolling, whatever. So I take the position of I'm not like a prohibitionist or anything. Like I'm relatively libertarian in the sense that, like, I believe people should be able to make their own choices. But I would approach all of technology and our relationship to it a little bit the way that we approach anything that's addictive. It's about, don't let it control you. You need to control it. And the moment you can't control it is the moment you need to start stepping away. That's the moment where it's becoming an addiction and defining you and controlling you.
Yeah, it's kind of scary in that we're introducing technology to children at such a young age when they don't have the capability of knowing when too far is too far, of knowing when an addiction is occurring, of knowing that they're developing those ideas at such a young age, and they're developing it with the device in their hand. Yeah. So it is a scary place. We're both fathers. We both have kids we have to worry about. I know that I have limitations with my kids and their screen time, and we're constantly on about that. But they've grown up inside this world. It's not the world that you and I grew up in.
We can't pretend it's not there. It's very important. But I think that like the world of everybody smoking only 30 odd years ago, that if you are smoking around the dinner table, your kids are likely to start smoking. If you're sitting on your phone the whole time that you're, meant to be eating and conversing, your kids will probably have a similar relationship to phones as you. Yeah. And so for me personally, that's something that I'm pretty hard and fast about, that there isn't devices, and that we talk, and that we, we look each other in the eye. And I think that's got to come from the parents. Where that becomes hard, particularly with kids, is that some of our education does actually require devices, and that to me is and at quite a young age. Like, I just took my kids out of a school, which basically required kids to have iPads from grade 1, in spite of the World Health Organization recommending that children do not have screens until they're 6 or 7 years old. So it is hard to be a parent, and this is a school in it's a state school, but like a school in a relatively wealthy area, educated and everything, that just doesn't seem to recognize the challenges. And I think I'm constantly amazed by how ignorant the general public is of the problems with device usage, and I would say that social media is really just a part of that. Like, it is device usage, because none of the kids at my kids' school had social media at a young age, but they did have Messenger, and Messenger really functions very much like a social media. And so when they've got group chats going and all that sort of stuff, they'd go down some pretty kind of serious rabbit holes. There were a few incidents with other kids where the school had to be involved, and it's too much for little kids. It's too much for adults. Like, it's hard enough for adults to control themselves, and here we are, kind of thrusting these addictive things into our kids' hands, like we're handing them, a glass of wine or a cigarette. It's pretty amazing. We'll look back on this time a little bit like the way we look back on the 50s and 60s. It's like, wow, they really had no idea, didn't they?
Yeah, and I guess it raises the broader question that we can take home with, and that's how far is too far when we push it into the industrial sphere.
Yes.
We can control that in our own homes, but when we start introducing those sort of technologies at a larger scale that influences our industrial economy, the way that we do business, the way that we interrelate to people, the way that government functions, then those same questions are going to start to be appearing. Of how far is too far? How much of an addiction, how much of a reliance do we have on that? How much of our humanity have we lost in the process of doing that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I'm maybe a little pessimistic on this one because history has shown that, most technology advancements are a Pandora's box that we just can't close once we open them. We have an increasingly competitive international landscape that also means that things like AI are going to be very hard to put the brakes on because anybody who puts the brakes on is going to be disadvantaging themselves on a kind of an international level. So you're not going to see America, put too much regulation on AI because there's practically zero regulation, or at least formal regulation of AI in China. And so you've got, kind of DeepSeek being, funded largely by the Chinese government, although it's kind of hidden. But there is an arms race going on, and every arms race, if you look far enough into the future, you can see that it's going to end in some form of doom. But there's also doom in the near future as well, in not having that edge. And the obvious parallel is, the kind of the nuclear age and what happened after Los Alamos. That's also somewhat similar, similarly kind of like existential as well. So I think it's a little harder with AI too for people to really understand what that existential threat is, as opposed to nuclear weapons, which are pretty damn obvious. The existential threat with AI is one that is like philosophically existential as well, because we're going to come to a point where people are going to wonder what the point is and feel purposeless and that sort of thing, unless we can grow. So I just don't think that we can stop it. Like, I think too far is probably where we're getting to a point where we're just basically replacing every part of the human experience, which is so far off into the future, I'm not sure. I'm a pretty big supporter and user of AI in its current form, and some of the agentic kind of systems that are starting to come out. My workflows and this new business, like a big part of it is basically just automating. And this is going to sound a little bit brutal, but like also just looking at ways of optimizing workforce, and doing things in a way that really just makes us a lot more nimble and responsive to data as well, and taking away a lot of the kind of I'm not going to say impediments, but like the kind of the complications that come with running these things through staff as opposed to running them through automation. And then the challenge with that obviously is like ensuring that there's enough eyes on it, that we're not the mistakes that inevitably happen with AI and automation end up kind of running wild. But yeah, I mean, I'm the guy that's probably more bullish on the positives of AI, because I see it already solving some big, hairy challenges facing humanity.
I think what it does do for us, if we come full circle in the conversation, if all that it does is starts the conversation around what personal identity is, and being able to help us reframe the importance of knowing who we are and the impact that we have in the world around us, then it's not a bad catalyst. If it helps us improve our relationships, it helps us to have better human connections, and then I think it may be a catalyst for a better step forward. And I hope that we have that frame and mindset as we move into this future.
Yeah, I hope so too.
Look, mate, you've been really helpful. I'm not going to hold you up any longer. I do want to thank you for your time, for your history and your expertise in this space. It provides us a really good lens and a good perspective on where we're currently at, the really positives that we can take into the future, but also some things that give us pause for reflection. So thank you for that, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what comes out of your new future. So we'll stay tuned for that.
And you too, LinkedIn. I'm looking forward to seeing what you do with yourself.
Yeah, thanks, mate. Thanks for your time, and we'll catch up soon.